Southern Italy, summer 1944, a pale sun rises over the Adriatic Sea, casting long shadows across the sprawling concrete of a USAAF bomber field. Engines growl awake, one by one, until the morning air trembles under the heavy pulse of Pratt & Whitney power. A B-24 Liberator sits among the formation, olive-drab skin scarred by missions past. The crew climbs aboard quietly, no cheering, no speeches, just routine and fear buried beneath routine. Inside the narrow fuselage, sweat already forms under flight jackets. The navigator folds maps with mechanical precision. The bombardier checks the northern sight again and again, as if certainty could deflect flak. The pilots review switches, levers, fuel selectors, a ritual that keeps death at bay. Outside, ground crew pull the last chocks away. The target today is far, heavily defended. Every man knows the odds. The bomber lifts from the runway, heavy, determined, climbing into thin blue air. The earth falls away behind them, and so does every chance of safety. Because what happens over the target will demand a choice no training ever prepared them for. A burning B-24, a runway within reach, and a decision that will echo long after the smoke clears. By mid-1944, the skies over Europe had become a brutal chessboard of steel and fire. Every day, long columns of American bombers pushed into Axis airspace, determined to crush the industrial heart powering Germany's war machine. It was a strategy built on range, endurance, and sacrifice, and no aircraft symbolized that sacrifice more than the consolidated B-24 Liberator. The B-24 was fast for its size, with high aspect ratio wings and a powerful bomb load. But those same wings, the Davis design, were thin and unforgiving. The fuel tanks they held were vulnerable. One tracer round could turn vaporized gasoline into a firestorm in seconds. Crews knew this all too well. A burning B-24 was not a wounded aircraft. It was a flying inferno. American bomber groups based in Italy, operating under the 15th Air Force, took on some of the most distant and dangerous missions of the war. Oil refineries at Ploiesti, factories deep inside Germany, rail lines feeding the front in the Balkans, targets defended by layers of anti-aircraft guns and Luftwaffe fighters determined to stop them before they reached their bomb run. Every mission brief began with numbers, fuel loads, altitudes, enemy strength estimated by intelligence officers who rarely underestimated, but never exaggerated the danger enough to match what actually waited in the sky. Crewmen listened, silent. Most had seen a bomber erupt into flames midair. Most had watched parachutes blossom or not. They understood the brutal math of survival. If your aircraft was hit and fire ran along the wing, if hydraulics failed, if a control cable snapped, you might not have the seconds needed to save yourself. Still, they climbed aboard. They did so not for glory or medals. Those came after the fact, if they came at all, but because the war was a machine and they were part of it. A necessary gear turning toward victory. Missions had to be flown, targets had to be destroyed, and the air war demanded men willing to bet their lives on the chance that their bombs would shorten the conflict. Training had taught them to trust their aircraft, their crew, and their procedures. Yet there was one scenario no checklist could solve. What if the plane could still fly, barely, but it was engulfed in fire? Standard doctrine was clear: break formation, turn toward friendly territory, find a field or coast to ditch near. Save the crew, save the plane if possible. But doctrine didn't account for every situation, not when losing control could mean falling into towns full of civilians, not when a damaged bomber still held a full load of explosives, not when turning away could mean leading German fighters straight back to the formation. And not when a target was still ahead, and the mission might still be completed. Daylight bombing relied on discipline. The group flew in tight boxes for mutual defense. Every break in the formation weakened the whole. A single bomber peeling away opened a gap fighters could exploit like sharks sensing blood. So crews wrestled with decisions under crippling pressure: stay in formation and increase the fire's spread, break off, and become helpless prey, press on, and risk everything for a mission that demanded precision but offered no guarantee of return. This was not heroism born from stories, but the cold logic of war. The faster the target fell, the sooner the war would end, and if one aircraft, one crew, paid the price, command considered it necessary. What no mission planner wrote into the orders was this unspoken reality. Sometimes a crew could reach friendly airfields. Sometimes they could ditch in the sea. Sometimes they could bail out over Allied territory and survive. But sometimes, painfully often, the fire spread too fast. Destruction became inevitable, and in those final minutes or seconds, the crew faced a choice wholly their own. Use the last of their strength to save only themselves, or turn their dying aircraft into a final weapon. That is the story at the heart of this mission, the moment when survival was possible, yet the crew chose otherwise. A burning B-24 with its fate sealed, still steering toward its target. That decision did not begin over the target. It began the moment the wheels left the ground, and the bomber joined a war that allowed no easy way home. And from this relentless air war, built on commitment, courage, and harsh necessity, emerges the next layer of understanding. The mission itself, the target ahead, and the defenses prepared to destroy anyone who dared approach. Before sunrise, the bomber groups in southern Italy had gathered inside their briefing huts, crowded around the mission board as officers revealed the day's objective. The red string stretched far across the map, a line of danger that every airman understood instantly. The target was a strategic refinery complex feeding German mechanized divisions across the Balkans. Knock it out, and the Eastern Front would starve for fuel. Miss it, and the Wehrmacht's engines would continue grinding through cities and soldiers without pause. Mission planners divided the assault into multiple waves, squadrons staggered by minutes, all intended to converge over the objective at precisely calculated times. There was no margin for error. If the lead group faltered or scattered, the carefully timed attack would unravel, leaving later arrivals exposed and alone. Crews checked everything twice: flak gear, parachutes, machine guns, bomb racks. The weight of each step felt heavier than the gear they carried. A B-24 Liberator, tail number known only to the men who flew her, was assigned its place in the formation. Its engines ran smoothly, fuel tanks topped, bomb load secure. At that moment, it was just another bomber among many, judged only by whether it would deliver its payload on target. But the men inside sensed the stakes. Every mission farther into enemy territory stretched the limits of endurance and fate. Takeoff was uneventful. The Liberator joined the rising mass of aircraft, climbing into clean skies that promised nothing. The Mediterranean glistened below. Some pilots glanced down, imagining what ditching there might feel like, cold, violent, and swift, then forced the thought away. As the hours wore on, tension built with every kilometer closer to Axis territory. German radar stations detected the incoming formation long before the bombers crossed into occupied lands. Alarms sounded across airfields. Fighters were scrambled. Anti-aircraft crews readied their guns. Soon the formation would enter what crews called the flak belt, the outer ring of defenses that protected critical factories and refineries. Black bursts of smoke would mark the sky, each one a steel cloud lethal enough to shear wing spars or tear through fuel tanks in an instant. Inside the bomber, the atmosphere shifted, oxygen masks on, intercom checks complete. The waist gunners scanned the horizon, searching for the silver glint of enemy fighters. The bombardier reviewed the release sequence. The pilot trimmed the aircraft for tight formation flying. Any deviation now could disrupt defensive fire coordination. Minutes stretched long, hearts pounded harder. Then the first flak burst, a distant pop, a dark flower blooming below the formation. Another, closer, shrapnel rattled against fuselages. In the Liberator's cockpit, the pilots felt the aircraft tremble with every near miss. The engineer monitored engine temperatures. Fuel management became a delicate dance. The navigator's voice tightened as he called minor course adjustments, trying to thread the formation through a storm with no safe path. The Germans were finding their range. A shell exploded beneath the bomber's left wing, a flash of orange, a streak of fuel igniting in the slipstream. Fire, fast, hungry, lethal, raced toward the engine. The intercom erupted with voices. Fire suppression activated, but it was too late. Flames licked around the nacelle. Heat blistered the aluminum skin. In seconds, the crew understood the grim truth. The aircraft would not survive long. Training kicked in: analyze, decide, respond. Standard procedure: divert, find a landing site, save the crew. But two facts collided brutally with that logic. They were still minutes away from the initial point, the last turn before the bomb run. The formation around them depended on every gun staying active. The bomber could still fly, barely, but a burning wing meant time was running out for everyone aboard. The pilot gripped the controls. The co-pilot steadied the wings. Sweat mixed with the smell of fuel vapors seeping into the cockpit. Behind them, the gunners stayed at their stations. No one dared remove focus. If they turned away towards safety, the fire might not doom them. If they stayed on target, death was nearly certain. Yet staying meant their mission would continue undisrupted. Staying meant the formation remained strong. Staying meant the refinery might still burn today. The choice lay ahead. Every second of continued flight fed the fire. Every heartbeat brought the flames deeper into the wing structure. And yet, no one reached for the bailout alarm, not yet. Because the turning point, the moment that would define every name inside that fuselage, still waited over the target. And the target was now drawing close. Every bomber crew that entered the skies of Europe carried a world of reasons behind each decision they made. Any one of them could tilt the balance between survival and sacrifice. In this blazing moment, a B-24 still flying despite the inferno eating through its wing. Those reasons clashed inside a narrow fuselage where destiny tightened its grip. Here are the angles that shaped the choice ahead. The human angle: brotherhood before fear. Inside a bomber, men were not strangers thrown together by war. They lived, trained, and fought as one organism with 10 hearts beating in the same steel body. They ate together, laughed together, and sometimes mourned the empty chairs at breakfast after a mission gone wrong. No one wanted to be the first to say, "Let's abandon the aircraft," because that meant deciding when hope died. Parachuting into enemy territory almost guaranteed capture if the parachute even opened, and bailing out of a burning bomber, fire whipping along the fuselage, could be just as lethal as staying. So the crew held their stations. The gunners stayed on their swivels, eyes forward. The pilot kept his voice calm, knowing panic could kill faster than fire. Abandoning ship meant leaving brothers to fend for themselves. As long as the airplane still responded to the controls, they stayed together. They trusted one another. They trusted their machine, and trust can be stronger than fear. The tactical angle: the box formation must hold. American daylight bombing relied on a principle proven through blood. A tight box was survival. A scattered group was slaughter. German fighters hunted the broken, the stragglers, the ones forced to turn away. A lone bomber was almost a guarantee of loss. There was safety only in numbers and in disciplined geometry. This burning B-24 still filled a position in the formation, still added its 50 caliber guns to the interlocking arcs of defense, still blocked a gap the enemy could exploit. If they banked away, the space they left would ripple through the formation, forcing others to adjust under heavy flak. A single break could shatter the bombing run's precision. The mission was designed like a machine. If one cog broke, the entire mechanism could fail. To stay was to protect the mission. To leave was to give the enemy an opening. The moral angle: collateral damage weighed heavier than survival. Turning back with a wing engulfed in flames created a new danger. Loss of control wasn't a possibility, it was an approaching certainty. A bomber spiraling from altitude was not just a tragedy for its crew. It was a meteor falling toward whatever lay beneath: a town, a village, a field of civilians who never chose this war. Crews knew stories, many far too real, of burning bombers crashing into homes or markets, leaving devastation that no soldier wanted on his conscience. So when the navigator glanced at the map and saw enemy-held cities below, when the pilot imagined losing lift in a violent roll, when the flight engineer felt fire chewing closer to the fuel tanks, one truth crystallized. If the aircraft was doomed, they would choose where it died. Better to stay high, stay steady, stay on the attack, and fall where the mission demanded, not where innocence lived. The technological angle: a liberator could fly while destroying itself. The B-24 was a paradox: brutal vulnerability paired with astonishing resilience. The Davis wing sliced through the air efficiently, giving the bomber long reach, but it was also thin, holding large, unprotected fuel tanks, get hit once, and fire often followed. Yet that same wing, even burning, could sometimes hold integrity for many minutes, enough to drop bombs, enough to remain controllable right up to the moment everything failed at once. Crews understood this from experience. Hydraulics could be shot out, and the pilot could still muscle the controls. Engines could burn, and the aircraft could still fly on 3 or 2. Fire could spread, and still leave seconds to complete the run. The B-24 gave just enough hope to push a dying aircraft onward. That hope often came with a fatal cost. The duty angle, training, conditioned them to finish the mission. Every briefing drilled a single message into the airmen's minds: if the lead bomber succeeds, the mission succeeds. Every aircraft mattered, especially those near the lead. Bombardiers depended on synchronized release. Gunners depended on all arcs active. Pilots depended on the box remaining tight. Duty was more than orders, it was identity. If they returned without dropping their bombs, they would fly tomorrow, and the refinery fueling German tanks would still function tonight. The war would grind on, and more missions would claim more crews. The calculus was cruel, but clear. Sometimes sacrifice saved more lives in the long run. The enemy angle: the Germans were watching. Luftwaffe ground observers tracked damage eagerly. A wounded bomber was a beacon, a promise of a kill. If the B-24 broke away now, fighters would pounce, drawing others into danger, disrupting the run, sowing chaos. The safest place, paradoxically, was to stay under the protective guns of the formation. The Germans wanted exactly what fear suggested: isolate, break, destroy. This crew denied them that satisfaction. All these angles, human, tactical, moral, technological, dutiful, and adversarial, crushed together inside a flaming metal tube hurtling toward a defended target. They could still survive, they could still turn back, they could still choose life. But every second the fire spread, that options slipped further away. And the moment was coming, the moment where thought would stop, instinct would rule, and a burning bomber would dive not away from danger, but into it. The burning B-24 now flew on the edge of irreversible fate. Fire crept deeper into the wing root. The smell of burning fuel and scorched aluminum invaded the crew compartment. The intercom crackled with strained voices, each man working at the limits of skill and hope. Here are the final angles that shaped their choice. 7. The command angle, orders that leave no room for hesitation. Higher command understood one brutal truth: bombing raids only achieved results when aircraft stayed on mission. Every squadron was briefed with the same underlying directive: do not disengage unless the aircraft can no longer reach the target. Interpretation rested entirely on the crew. If the airplane could hold altitude, even barely, command expected commitment. And after months of loss, every airman understood what was at stake: factories that built U-boats, refineries that filled Panzer fuel tanks, petrochemical plants that fed the Wehrmacht's entire war effort. Each was guarded like the spine of the German army. Destroying them meant shortening the war. Command would salute returning heroes, but they would also mark missing aircraft as necessary sacrifices. So the pilot weighed the silent message that every briefing conveyed. If there's a chance to finish the mission, finish it. Even at the edge of survival. 8. The time angle, seconds measured in fire. Fire was the ultimate clock in aerial warfare. The crew of this B-24 understood that a burning wing rarely allowed a gradual descent or a calm bailout. Instead, aircraft often lost lift abruptly when the heat warped spars or melted control linkages. One moment in control, the next tumbling through sky. This was the countdown they faced. How long until the fire consumed the fuel tank? How long until the outboard engine tore loose? How long until the wing failed entirely? Every second closer to the target meant fewer seconds left to escape, but those seconds, they were still seconds. Enough time to reach the bomb release point, enough time to aim and strike a blow that would matter. The clock did not care if they were brave or terrified. It cared only for oxygen-feeding flame. And oxygen was endless up here. 9. The psychological angle, committing to courage. There is a moment when fear becomes useless, when reality is too close, too overwhelming to avoid. Inside the cockpit, the pilots had already crossed that threshold. Their world was now a tunnel, aircraft heading, engine temps, fire spread, formation spacing, altitude, speed, oxygen pressure, bomb arming switch. There was no room left for imagining the future. No future existed beyond the next few miles. Courage in these moments is not a grand emotion. It is the absence of any alternative. Men act because action is the only choice remaining. And in that narrowing world, focus becomes absolute. Reach the target, hold the line, finish what you were sent to do. The legacy angle, the war remembers those who don't turn away. Crews rarely spoke of legacy, but they witnessed it in empty bunks, in missing faces, in names mentioned quietly over mess hall tables. Honor was not medals, honor was not headlines. Honor was finishing the mission. There is a particular kind of bravery in fulfilling duty when escape remains possible, when the decision to sacrifice is conscious, deliberate, and final. This crew could still turn home, they could still choose life. But history's harshest truth is that wars are won by those who refuse to break, even when breaking is justified. The war measured heroes not by who survived, but by who stayed. The enemy understanding angle, denying Germany a victory. German defenses watched the flaming B-24 with predatory anticipation. Flak batteries tracked it. Fighters maneuvered to strike if it fell behind the formation. A damaged aircraft was a celebration waiting to happen. But as long as it remained in place, as long as it held formation, the Germans were denied that triumph. Their calculations suffered, their timing cracked, their confidence wavered. A bomber on fire that refused to fall out was a statement written in smoke. You may kill us, but you cannot stop us. Sometimes morale shifts did not come from perfect bomb runs, but from sheer defiance. The final angle, if they only had one strike left, it would count. War simplifies life's biggest questions into a single demand. What will you do with your last chance? If the B-24 crashed short, the enemy gained victory. If it reached the target, even in its death, the mission gained purpose. One pass, one release, one explosion that could cripple German production for weeks or months. That equation leaves little room for hesitation. The crew understood, if they were doomed, let their doom matter. Better to die finishing the job than live knowing the target survived. All these angles collided into action as the bomber neared the initial point, where the formation would tighten, bombs would be armed, and flak would become a solid wall of fire. The wing burned hotter, metal softened, the aircraft groaned under its own destruction. Inside, no one spoke the obvious truth. Time was gone, escape was gone, decision was already made. The burning B-24 prepared to turn directly into the target run, where the true climax of the mission and their lives awaited. The target lay ahead, sprawling across the countryside like a fortress of industry. Refineries, storage tanks, and rail junctions crisscrossed the landscape, guarded by flak emplacements carefully camouflaged beneath the trees. Radar operators had long since picked up the formation. German fighters were already scrambling from hidden strips to intercept the approaching liberators. Inside the cockpit, the pilot's hands tightened around the yoke. The co-pilot's eyes flicked to the instruments, temperatures climbing, fuel creeping toward critical control surfaces stiff with heat. From the waist gunner's window, the flames licked along the starboard wing, their orange glow stark against the dawn sky. Smoke curled back in thick streams, tainting the clear blue above the Adriatic. Each second, the aircraft groaned under the stress of fire and weight. Behind them, the formation maintained its line. Other bombers did not falter. Any hesitation or break would leave gaps that Luftwaffe fighters could exploit. They depended on this B-24 to hold its station. Every gun still manned, every control input precise. Every second in formation counted as much as the bombs themselves. The bombardier checked the Norden sight one last time, fingers gripping the release switch. The target range closed with relentless speed. Anti-aircraft bursts from below began to pepper the sky, black puffs detonating too close for comfort, flinging steel fragments toward wings and fuselage. Flames danced along aluminum like an unholy ballet. The navigator called out headings, course corrections, and timing, all while smoke choked the aft compartment. Then the first direct hit. A shell struck the outer wing, ripping metal and sending a flare of gasoline into the slipstream. Heat surged into the cockpit. Instruments began to fail. Control inputs stiffened. Flight engineers shouted over the roar, attempting to activate suppression pumps, but the fire was already beyond containment. The pilot made the decision that history would remember. The Liberator would not turn back toward safety. Instead, it pressed forward toward the heart of the refinery complex. The crew, fully aware of the risks, stayed at their stations. Gunners tracked the rising fighters that streaked to intercept. The bombardier lined up the bombs, timing each release against altitude, speed, and crosswinds, calculations made under the heat of literal fire. At 12,000 feet, the release point approached. The aircraft quivered violently as metal succumbed to heat. Engines sputtered from damage, but the B-24 held fragile, burning, resolute. The bombardier's hand pressed the release. Bombs fell with deadly precision, streaking down to impact the refinery tanks and storage lines. The explosions ignited secondary fires across the complex, columns of black smoke rising to meet the morning sky. Mission success, achieved by a crew whose aircraft was now a flaming coffin. For an instant, all focus narrowed to survival. The aircraft groaned, wings creaking, fire-consuming structure at an alarming rate. The pilot banked slightly, attempting to stabilize for a final moment of control. Around them, traces from enemy fighters seared the air. The formation began evasive maneuvers, weaving to avoid flak bursts and fighter attacks. Every second held the aircraft aloft was a miracle. Every second was also borrowed time. The co-pilot's voice cut through smoke-filled intercom channels, reports of failed hydraulics, controls partially jammed. The radio crackled with distant commands, but the flames drowned all else. This was a battle no one else could fight. This was a war against physics, fire, and inevitability. The last seconds of flight became a sequence of instinctual responses, gentle aileron inputs, subtle rudder corrections, careful throttle modulation, all while the aircraft continued to burn. Each man understood the unspoken truth. If the bomber fell now, the formation would lose a protective gun platform. The target might remain unscathed. The lives of others depended on their perseverance. Then, as the Liberator cleared the immediate flak zone, fire consumed the inner wing section entirely. Structural integrity was compromised. The aircraft shuddered violently. One last adjustment, a push on the yoke, a pull on the rudder pedals, and the Liberator held long enough for the crew to complete the bomb run. Mission accomplished, but the aircraft would not survive the return. Flames raged beyond control, fuel tanks ruptured, metal warped. Every man aboard understood this was the final act. No bailout, no landing, no rescue could now save them from the inevitable. Their choice had already been made, and history would remember the courage required to make it. As the formation began to pull away, leaving the burning Liberator over the target, the echoes of the explosions resonated in the minds of every crewman who had flown alongside them. They had pressed forward when retreat was possible. They had acted when instinct screamed survival. They had chosen the mission over themselves, a decision that would define the moral and tactical complexity of aerial warfare forever. The B-24, now a flaming silhouette against the smoke-filled sky, carried the weight of that choice. It had become both weapon and sacrifice. Every man aboard had contributed to the destruction below, and every man aboard knew the end was near. The pilot leveled as long as possible, coaxing what little remained from the controls. The crew braced for impact, not in panic, but in grim acceptance. Death, they understood, was imminent, yet it was chosen, deliberate, and in service of a greater objective. And above the roar of engines, the crackle of fire, and the distant explosions of the refinery, one truth remained: they could have turned home. They did not. And in that moment, the B-24 became more than an aircraft. It became a testament to the limits of courage, duty, and human resolve. The B-24 burned hotter now than anyone could have imagined minutes before. Smoke thickened, churning into the fuselage and obscuring the flight deck. Instruments failed one by one. The left wing drooped visibly under the heat, and the crew could hear metal twisting and snapping like brittle bone. Every heartbeat reminded them that survival was slipping further away. From the waist, the gunners fired at fighters that dared to come too close, their barrels spitting tracer rounds through haze and flame. The ball turret below spun as its gunner fought for every shot, the acrid odor of gunpowder mixing with the stench of burning oil. They held formation, a fragile part of a living chain of steel, determined to give their comrades the protection that alone could keep the mission alive. The bombardier's fingers were blistered, yet he remained at his sight, calculating speed, altitude, wind drift, and bomb trajectory. His voice came faintly over the smoke-choked intercom, calling the final readings, timing the release. The target, a massive complex of storage tanks and refinery buildings, stretched across the horizon, heavily defended, but now vulnerable to the Liberator's payload. Precision was still possible, even as the aircraft itself threatened to disintegrate around them. The pilot's hands gripped the yoke, muscles taut. He felt every tremor, every vibration, every failure of systems that had once been reliable. Engines sputtered, flaps refused commands, hydraulic pressure dwindled, yet he guided the aircraft straight and true, coaxing from it what little control remained. Every correction, every push, every pull was a negotiation with death. Below, the flak continued to bloom, black clouds that tore at the sky, scattering shards of steel. Explosions rocked nearby aircraft. Around them, the formation shifted, banking, weaving, and firing, but no one broke from discipline. They all depended on the courage of each other, and now the crew of the burning B-24 carried the weight of that collective trust. As the release point drew near, the crew braced. The bombardier's hand moved over the release lever. A breath held, then the bombs fell, tracing arcs of death onto the refinery below. Secondary explosions erupted, fire spreading rapidly across storage tanks and rail lines. The mission was a success. The target was hit with devastating effect. The sacrifices of the crew had achieved their goal. But there was no time for relief. The fire had reached the fuel lines, feeding into the remaining engines. Smoke filled the cockpit, limiting visibility. Metal moaned, threatening to tear away entirely. Every man knew the end was near. The Liberator would not make it home. Escape by parachute was no longer an option. The flames now reached all compartments, leaving no safe exit. The pilot maintained calm precision as the aircraft began its final descent. The co-pilot supported every input, their motions synchronized by countless hours of training and shared experience. Behind them, gunners continued to cover the formation, each shot a defiance of the inevitable. The crew, fully aware of their fate, did not panic. There was only duty. The mission had to be completed, and they had held true to that commitment. Around them, the war continued. Other bombers pressed on or began evasive maneuvers. Enemy fighters wheeled for attacks, oblivious to the resolve of one doomed crew. The Liberator, now a flaming silhouette against the morning sky, became an emblem of concentrated courage. Every meter of forward flight, every second of continued control was an act of defiance against fire, gravity, and the chaos surrounding them. Finally, the aircraft's structure gave way. The left wing twisted under heat, the fuselage began to break apart, and the remaining engines faltered. Yet the crew maintained what stability they could, holding the aircraft on course toward open ground beyond the refinery complex. The bombs had already found their mark, their destructive work done, and now the Liberator itself became the final element of the assault, a weapon in its own right, carrying the courage, training, and deliberate choice of those aboard. As the aircraft disappeared into smoke and flames, the silence inside the fuselage was replaced by the inevitable, a final, resolute moment where instinct and training fused completely. Death was certain, but it was chosen, deliberate, and in the service of a mission larger than any one life. The rest of the formation, witnesses to the sacrifice, continued on. They carried the weight of this act, a stark reminder that in aerial warfare, courage was measured not in survival alone, but in commitment when every option but mission completion had become impossible. And from this extreme act of bravery, a lesson emerged, that the air war demanded choices no human could make lightly, and that sometimes the ultimate measure of valor was not living to tell the tale, but ensuring the mission succeeded when even life itself was on the line. The morning sky over the target now bore the scars of fire and steel. Smoke from burning refinery tanks curled into the atmosphere, a black plume that would be visible for miles. Below, shattered infrastructure, twisted metal, and scorched earth marked the success of the mission. The bombs dropped by the flaming B-24 had ignited a chain reaction of explosions, taking out storage tanks, fuel lines, and rail access points. German intelligence officers later recorded the strike as a devastating blow to the refinery's output. Weeks of production delayed, fuel supplies cut, and mechanized units forced to ration for days. Back at the base in Italy, crews landed or returned from the mission to a mixture of relief and shock. Survivors whispered of the Liberator that had flown into the inferno rather than turn back. Mission reports captured it with cold precision. A B-24 destroyed over the target, crew lost. Yet in the footnotes, the notation appeared, bombs on target, mission accomplished. This stark, factual record belied the courage it represented. Among airmen, the story spread quickly, carried by those who witnessed the final moments from nearby bombers in formation. The account was grim, but it resonated. A single aircraft, engulfed in flames, had chosen the mission over survival, and in doing so had protected the formation and ensured the bombing run succeeded. In personal diaries and letters home, the surviving crews wrote of bravery, devotion to duty, and the impossible decisions faced under fire. Some described it as awe-inspiring, others as tragic, a reminder of the human cost behind every tactical success. The official numbers were cold but telling. 1 aircraft lost, 10 crew members perished, scores of anti-aircraft shells fired, multiple fighters engaged, and yet the refinery's production was disrupted for weeks. Command recognized the tactical significance immediately. The 15th Air Force continued to rely on long-range bombing missions to cripple German logistics, but the story of a crew that refused to turn back became an enduring lesson in operational doctrine. In critical moments, determination and adherence to formation could outweigh instinctive survival. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate reports. Crews who flew alongside the doomed Liberator described a mixture of fear and inspiration. Fear, because they had seen the destructive power of fire on a B-24 in flight and knew it could happen to any of them. Inspiration, because they had witnessed a level of commitment that transcended standard duty. The mission illustrated a harsh truth. In the aerial war over Europe, success often required extraordinary bravery, calculated, deliberate, and sometimes fatal. Enemy records later confirmed the strike's effectiveness. German engineers noted the destruction of key storage tanks and the disruption of fuel distribution lines. Luftwaffe intercept reports referenced heavy bomber formations, but did not initially note the exceptional courage of the crew. Such details rarely survived in official enemy accounts. Yet historians piecing together mission logs, witness reports, and post-war analyses would later highlight this specific act as one of the more extreme examples of crew sacrifice during daylight raids. The immediate aftermath also included tangible shifts in operational thinking. Pilots and squadron leaders reviewed the flight, considering the choices made under fire. Debriefings emphasized the importance of formation integrity, the value of precision even under extreme duress, and the human element that could tip the scales between mission success and failure. Every surviving crew internalized one lesson. The B-24 was a fragile aircraft, yet in the hands of determined airmen, it could deliver destruction with precision, even at the cost of life. From base to briefing room, from the sky over enemy territory to the halls of military intelligence, the day's mission became a case study. Not simply in tactics or aircraft performance, but in human courage. The cost was clear: a full crew lost, an aircraft destroyed. The consequence: a critical target hit, a formation preserved, and the story of sacrifice etched into the annals of the air war. Even as subsequent missions continued, this single flight over the target remained a benchmark, a reminder that the decisions of men inside burning steel could define the line between mission success and catastrophic failure. In the days following the mission, official reports meticulously recorded the damage inflicted on the refinery. Reconnaissance photographs showed overturned storage tanks, collapsed rail lines, and fires still smoldering along supply depots. Analysts calculated the temporary loss in output, hundreds of tons of fuel delayed from reaching German front lines. The 15th Air Force Command considered the raid a success, yet the human cost remained starkly visible in the empty seats on returning flights. Squadron records identified the aircraft, the B-24 Liberator with a seasoned crew, all 10 members lost over the target. Witness statements from nearby bombers described the aircraft's final moments: flames racing along the wings, smoke choking the fuselage, yet controls maintained long enough to release the payload. The collective decision to remain on course, despite a choice to divert or bail out, became a defining example in training materials for bomber crews, emphasizing mission priority even under catastrophic damage. Letters and diaries from surviving airmen revealed the psychological weight of the event. Many wrote of awe and horror, noting that the crew's actions were an extreme measure of courage, a deliberate commitment to a mission beyond instinctive self-preservation. Some reflected on the moral dimension, how fear could be subordinated to duty, and how individual choice could safeguard not only strategic objectives, but the lives of others within the formation. Historians later highlighted this mission as a vivid case study of aerial warfare's moral and tactical dilemmas. Unlike missions that ended in routine losses, this flight illustrated the thin line between bravery and fatality. The B-24's structural design allowed it to remain airborne longer than expected under fire, yet the human element, discipline, cohesion, and choice was the critical factor that ensured the bombs struck the target. Modern analyses of bomber operations repeatedly cite such examples to illustrate how split-second decisions can alter mission outcomes. Enemy documentation, captured post-war, also noted the raid's effect. German intelligence recorded the destruction of key facilities, acknowledging temporary disruption of fuel distribution networks and logistic setbacks. Luftwaffe interception reports noted the intensity of defensive fire and the resilience of the bomber formations, but did not immediately recognize the exceptional determination of the burning aircraft's crew. Post-war accounts pieced together through interviews and declassified logs later revealed the full magnitude of their commitment. On the operational level, squadron leaders reviewed tactics in light of the event. Emphasis was placed on formation integrity, defensive coordination, and decision-making under extreme duress. Training manuals were updated with examples of crew choices under fire, underscoring both the human and mechanical factors that could determine success or failure. The mission became a reference point in discussions of aerial ethics, when survival was possible, but the larger objective demanded personal sacrifice. For surviving crews, the story became part of the cultural memory of the air war, a legend of courage passed between men who had flown similar missions. The The burning B-24 over the refinery was remembered not just as a technical event, but as a human one. It illustrated the ultimate tension of war, that the line between life and death is often determined by a conscious decision, and that such decisions could resonate far beyond the moment they were made. The cost remained immutable: 10 lives lost, a single aircraft destroyed. The consequence was undeniable: a strategic target hit, enemy resources disrupted, and lessons in bravery and duty enshrined in history. In every briefing, every debriefing, every reflection on the mission, the echo remained clear. Some victories demand more than skill or strategy. They demand the courage to act when the odds are impossible and survival is uncertain. And as future missions unfolded, every airman who took to the skis over Europe carried with them the memory of that flight, a testament to human resolve, to duty, and to the final sacrifice that secured a fleeting, yet decisive, moment of triumph. In the quiet years after the war, historians, veterans, and families would return to the story of the B-24 that chose its mission over survival. Not because it was an isolated act of bravery, there were many, but because it crystallized a fundamental truth of aerial warfare. Courage is measured not only in survival, but in the deliberate choice to confront impossible odds in service of something greater than oneself. The crew's decision to press forward while fire consumed their aircraft is a stark reminder of the human dimension behind every strategic victory. They could have turned back, could have survived, could have left the risk to someone else. But they understood that their actions affected more than themselves: the lives of comrades, the integrity of their formation, and the outcome of a mission that rippled far beyond the clouds where they flew. In that fleeting moment over the target, human choice and mechanical endurance converged, a fusion of resolve, training, and instinct. Technologically, the B-24 Liberator embodied both the brilliance and vulnerability of wartime engineering. Its long wings carried tremendous payloads, yet offered little protection against fire. Its endurance allowed crews to reach distant targets, but it demanded respect for its limits. That fragile balance between capability and vulnerability shaped every mission, and in this case, forced a choice that no training fully prepared any man to make. Philosophically, the flight illuminates the tension at the heart of all war, the collision of survival instinct and duty. The sky over the Adriatic, the refinery below, the roaring engines and rising flames, all became part of a tableau in which human courage was tested to its limit. What remains is not the destruction, but the decision to act decisively when every option carries risk, when life is fleeting, and when the consequences extend far beyond oneself. And so, the memory of that burning B-24 endures. It reminds us that heroism is not measured by medals or headlines, but by the quiet, deliberate choices made under fire. It teaches that in moments of extraordinary peril, the human spirit can assert itself, even in the face of inevitable death, leaving an enduring mark on history, on the men who bore witness, and on the generations who seek to understand the true cost of courage.